US President Donald Trump signs a memorandum to enforce reciprocal tariffs on foreign trade partners. The US and India agree to boost bilateral trade and military cooperation as the Prime Minister Modi meets with President Trump. And we explore how businesses are cashing in on the billion-dollar Valentine's Day economy. Hello, I'm Taiba Aiden with the latest business and finance news here on TRT World. US President Donald Trump has signed a presidential memorandum laying out his plan to impose reciprocal tariffs on foreign nations. Under the plan, the US will treat other countries' non-tariff policies as unfair trade practices that warrant tariffs in response, and new levies will be implemented on a country-by-country basis. The new tariffs will follow duties Trump has already slapped on China, Canada and Mexico, as well as on imports of steel and aluminium, raising fears of higher global inflation and supply chain disruptions. According to Trump's nominee to lead the Commerce Department, Howard Lutnick, the process should be complete by April 1st, and Trump could act immediately afterward. Let's get more on this now with Lee Singan in Kuala Lumpur. She's a financial market strategist at XNES. Now, we know this will be a country-by-country study on all of the US's trading partners. How are markets responding to this?
All right, thank you for having me. So we can see that gold is clearly responding to this atmosphere of uncertainty. So that is driving safe haven demand. Following, like what you mentioned, Trump is ordering a review of the reciprocal tariffs on countries with unfair trade practices, though the timeline regarding the implementation of this tariff still remains unclear. In the bond markets, we're seeing that this escalating trade frictions could also fuel demand for safe haven, which put downward pressure on yields. But concerns about this growing US fiscal deficit, as well as that long-term sustainability in terms of the government spending, could also erode some of those attractiveness on the US treasuries. I think that in terms of the dollar, we are seeing that the dollar weakened slightly today. A big part of it was driven not so much by the tariffs, but rather on the data that's coming out from the PPI. Even though we're seeing hotter than expected PPI data, some components of it, especially in the healthcare components, actually suggest that we could be seeing much lower PCE data coming up, So this is actually a preferred measure by the Fed in terms of measuring inflation. So in that sense, we could be seeing Fed or paving the way for Fed to lower interest rates, which also weighed on the dollar.
Now, these tariffs come amid some hotter than expected inflation data out of the US. Will American consumers be able to find alternatives to imports without inflation rising again?
Yeah, I think that in the short term, substitution would be difficult, American consumers are highly dependent on imports, especially in categories like electronics, apparel, consumer goods as well, So I think that businesses would try to source from other countries, but in terms of the supply chains, it could take years to adjust. There's also a big risk where tariffs push up input costs for businesses, They could either pass it on to the consumers, thereby fueling inflation, or absorb them, This could also mean lower margins for sellers, So a study by the US ITC, International Trade Commission, revealed that in Trump's first term, what happened was that it actually led to thinner margins as well as also increased costs for the downstream buyers. So I think that it could also erode some of the purchasing power for the American household. If tariffs do stay long enough, some industry might localize production, but it's not a quick fix, We will need to see changes in terms of investments in infrastructure, workforce training, as well as regulatory adjustments.
Okay, Lee Shingan, financial market strategist at XNES. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.
Meanwhile, the United States plans to increase military sales to India with the possibility of supplying F-35 fighter jets in the future. During his visit to Washington, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with President Donald Trump, discussing trade, security and defense. India pledged to boost imports to US oil and gas to help balance trade. The two leaders also discussed the potential extradition of a suspect from the US to India over the 2008 Mumbai attacks.
Starting this year, we'll be increasing military sales to India by many billions of dollars. We're also paving the way to ultimately provide India with the F-35 stealth fighters. In 2017, my administration revived and reinvigorated the Quad security partnership. In our meeting today, the Prime Minister and I reaffirmed that strong cooperation among the United States, India, Australia, and Japan, and it's crucial really to maintaining peace and prosperity, tranquility, even in the Indo-Pacific.
I
am very grateful to President Trump. In 2008, somebody who carried out genocide in India, that criminal is now going to be handed over to India, and I'm grateful to President Trump for this. And appropriate action will be taken in the courts in India.
Now, across the globe, inflation is on the rise and countries face challenges in navigating this pressure. Consumer data released this week shows that inflation in the US, Japan and China is higher than expected. Inflation in the US rose to 3% in January, its highest rate in 6 months, surpassing the 2.9% economists had forecast. Core inflation increased by 0.4% month on month, marking the fastest pace since March. A major contributor to the rise in inflation is food prices. Grocery prices climbed 0.5% in January, up from 0.3% the previous month. This represents the highest monthly increase in nearly a decade. This inflation surge comes just weeks after the US Federal Reserve decided to hold interest rates steady. The rise now presents a challenge for President Donald Trump, who made tackling inflation a centerpiece of his election campaign last year. But he has also pursued policies such as higher tariffs on imports that may be contributing to the inflationary pressure. On the same day, Japan also released inflation data showing a rise in wholesale prices. Japan's annual wholesale inflation surged to 4.2%, a 7-month high. While this may seem like a negative sign, it's actually good news for Japan, which has struggled with deflation for years. Meanwhile, in China, the consumer price index rose by 0.5% in January, marking the fastest pace in 5 months. But the Chinese economy remains under pressure with weak demand and deflation concerns. Now, in a surprising turn of events, the UK economy has managed to defy expectations, posting a modest 0.1% growth in the final quarter of 2024. Analysts had braced for a contraction, but fresh figures from the Office of National Statistics tells a different story, as Tulay Kalyon has Nadarola reports.
After months of stagnation, the latest GDP figures show a small yet significant rebound. But what's driving this unexpected uptick?
It's not possible to turn around more than a decades of poor economic performance in just a few months. But we are doing what is necessary to bring stability back to the economy, reforming the economy, the planning system, regulation and pensions, to encourage investment in our economy, which is the lifeblood of a successful economy. We need to go further and faster in doing that to turn around our poor growth performance and to make working people better off.
Key contributors to the increase included a rise in activity across pubs, bars and the manufacturing sector. And consumers came out in December during holiday seasons, giving a much-needed lift to hospitality, while industrial production showed resilience.
The growth numbers have come in higher than many expected, but I'm still not satisfied with the level of growth that our economy is achieving, and that's why I am determined to go further and faster in delivering the economic growth and the improvements in living standards that our country deserves.
But while overall GDP edged up, GDP per capita dropped by 0.1%. In other words, economic growth isn't translating into individual gains. Meanwhile, the Bank of England has slashed its 2025 growth forecast from 1.5% to just 0.75%, citing inflation, rise in national insurance costs, and looming US trade tariffs. Now, all eyes are on the Office for Budget Responsibilities forecast on March 26. Will the recovery hold, or is this just a blip? Tülay Kalyon Haznedaroğlu, TRT World, London.
For more on this, let's speak with Russ Mould in London, Director of Investment at AJ Bell. Russ, firstly, what's helped drive this unexpected growth in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, you did see generally weak performance in consumer expenditure, business investment and residential investment, and imports grew faster than exports. So that was the bad news. The good news, such as it was that government spending was pretty strong. So the public sector really provided support to the overall economy.
Right, now with tax rises coming into force in April, how concerned are you that economic growth will remain sluggish for majority of this year?
It's very possible, as we've already heard, that the Bank of England has cut its forecast for this year. Businesses are already adapting to the new tax regime, and there are lots of, lots of surveys which suggest that they are being very careful with their decisions to hire and to spend. But do remember that some of this is a result of Bank of England policy. They last raised interest rates in April 2023. Monetary policy works with a lag of 18 to 24 months. So the economy is still feeling the impact of the Bank of England's efforts to tighten monetary policy to cool down inflation. And that is having a part, as are overseas events, as we've heard, because of the possibility of tariffs.
And what will help revive growth?
I think confidence is a good thing. I think we all need to try and be a little bit more optimistic. But the Bank of England is also doing its part. It has cut interest rates 3 times already. It will look to, I think markets are expecting 2, maybe 3 more reductions going forwards. Some calm on the tariff front would be extremely helpful, and getting inflation down to 2% would give the Bank of England further room for manoeuvre as well.
All right, Russ Mould, Director of Investment at AJ Bell, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now a quick look at some of the other top business stories from around the world. Argentina's inflation has hit a 5-year low, marking a victory for President Javier Milei. The monthly rate fell to a lower than expected 2.2% in January as Milei's austerity measures helped stabilize the economy. Annual inflation dropped to 84.5%, with consumer prices falling below 100% for the first time in 2 years. Japan's biggest car makers Honda and Nissan have officially confirmed scrapping merger discussions. The proposed $58 billion deal, which would have formed the world's 4th largest automaker, collapsed after Honda suggested turning Nissan into a fully owned subsidiary. Following the news, Nissan's shares slipped by 0.3%, while Honda's rose by 2.1%. TikTok has returned to the Apple and Google US app stores nearly a month after being removed due to national security law. President Trump said the deadline for a possible TikTok ban could be extended and expressed hope for a deal to keep the app in the US. He's also credited the app for helping him win the 2024 election. And Senegal has started refining its own oil at a refinery near Dakar. Though the African Refinery Company was founded in 1961, this is the first time it has refined locally produced oil, having only worked with imports before. Since Saturday, 650,000 barrels of crude oil were processed, producing 90,000 tons of diesel, kerosene, petrol and butane gas. Love is in the air, and around this time, florists can expect record sales, particularly of red roses. But this year, a surprising trend is taking over Valentine's Day, as Nicholas Morgan reports.
You think of Valentine's Day and you think of ruby red roses wrapped in ribbon and gone in a week. Around 250 million flower stems are sold globally on Valentine's Day.
We noticed like a huge upsurge in really beautiful bouquets and people gifting them to their loved ones, but not just, the typical like guy buying for their partner, and women gifting themselves, women gifting their best friends, which was so nice to see.
But times, they are a-changing. Now a new kind of flower is blooming, one that never wilts, never fades, and lasts as long as love itself, possibly longer. Artificial flowers are all the rage right now. The latest are soft to the touch, look incredibly realistic, and never, ever need water. And business is blooming. Even brides are saying, "I do," clutching a bunch of plastic.
I'd say it's definitely grown and continues to grow, both from a domestic point of view, more people have them in their homes, but also from a commercial perspective. You go to restaurants, they're all over the ceilings and the walls, and I think that's driven a real demand in faux flowers in general.
Last year, Valentine's Day flower sales hit $2.6 billion in the US alone. That's up from $2.4 billion the year before. And for 2025, well, predictions say another record year is coming. And yet, despite expectations, buyers of artificial flowers are coming back for more.
It's often something that people ask me is, why would you sell something that doesn't die, when obviously you want that repeat purchase? But I find our repeat customer rate is really high. When people buy faux flowers and they like them, they definitely come back.
So what's next for Valentine's Day? Expect bigger bouquets, bolder colours, and record-breaking sales. Because if love never fades, neither do the flowers. Nicholas Morgan, TRT World.
Let's cross now to Sydney and speak to Mark Humphrey-Jenner, an Associate Professor of Finance at the UNSW Business School. Now, as we heard, flowers are a big business, but there's so much more than that. Which industries profit the most from Valentine's Day?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me. And certainly we're seeing a lot of spending around Valentine's Day, and consumers are expected to spend some $27.5 billion on Valentine's Day gifts in the United States. And it's not just the US. In Australia, for example, consumers are expected to spend $535 million. Now, one might wonder exactly how rubbery those figures are, but certainly there's a lot of spending going on. Now, in terms of the exact gifts, well, there's actually a broad smattering. So, for example, chocolates and candy and things like that, well, those still appear to account for at least one of the largest portions of gifts. Reportedly, according to the National Retail Federation, 56% of people in their survey were going to buy candy, followed by flowers at 40% and greeting cards. Well, they aren't the gift per se, but still greeting cards at 40%. We've also got a large group of consumers who are going to spend money on events and evenings out. So whether it be on the night or around that night or an event of some kind, an experience, that being 35% of consumers, and then 22% of consumers indicated they'd spend money on jewelry. But it isn't just that, because if we look at some of the other figures as well, a large number of individuals are going to buy gifts for their friends. So reportedly 32% of consumers in the United States are going to buy gifts for friends, and also 32% of consumers are going to buy gifts for their pets, suggesting that pet retail might actually get a bit of an uplift around this time period as well. So a broad cross-section of spending, and it's seemingly quite a lot of spending at the moment.
Right, and how are businesses tapping into the holidays without seeming too commercial?
It's always a slightly tricky balancing act. So clearly for florists, they would obviously tap into this because that would be a staple. It would be a boom time for them, similar with retailers that are selling things like chocolate and the like. But other retailers can try to tap into it in a slightly more subtle way, trying to present things in a more romantic manner when they're going about putting out their retail stands, trying to provide subtle hints that that particular thing might create a good gift. Additionally, retailers might try to bring in an extent or an experience into the types of things they're trying to sell, either in-store or potentially trying to sell events as another way of connecting with consumers. But ultimately, anything around this time period is going to look commercial in nature. It's almost unavoidable. It's just a matter of not making it look too tacky when they're going out and advertising.
Now, what about smaller businesses? How do they compete with the bigger retailers and maximize profits during holidays like Valentine's Day?
Certainly, it's a challenge for smaller retailers to compete with big retailers in the best of scenarios. After all, big retailers really have the lion's share of the marketing budget, a lot of foot traffic. People often default in going to a big retailer if they're stuck for ideas. However, it's worth noting that buying a generic gift was reportedly rather badly received according to surveys, where that was perhaps the less favoured even less favored than no gift, according to some surveys, although I do dispute whether that's actually really factual. But nevertheless, people are going to benefit the most when they're going out and buying a gift by actually finding something a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit off the beaten track, a little bit more unique. And perhaps smaller retailers can try to tap into the desire for people buying something that doesn't look commercial, doesn't look generic, and might appear to be more thoughtful. So they can compete by either providing something unique or potentially by trying to provide an experience or an event that can dovetail into the actual gift purchase itself.
Indeed. Mark Humphrey-Jenner, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for that analysis.
Thanks for having me. Great being with you.
Now, the recent Artificial Intelligence Action Summit in Paris exposed deep divisions among nations and highlighted the balancing act between economic growth and security concerns. Artificial intelligence is projected to contribute $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030. The United States and China are expected to account for nearly 70% of this growth. Meanwhile, the European Union lags behind but aims to close the gap with a $110 billion AI investment plan. By 2030, AI data centers could consume as much electricity as small nations. Estimates suggest that AI could account for 3 to 5% of global electricity demand, posing challenges for sustainability goals. France, China and India have committed to an AI for the Planet initiative, whilst the UK and US remain cautious about restrictive policies that could hinder AI's development. 60 countries, including France, China and India, signed the Paris AI Action Statement, advocating for an open, inclusive and ethical AI future. But the UK and US cited concerns over national security and global governance and refused to sign. As regulatory frameworks diverge, AI governance is becoming a geopolitical battleground, influencing trade, investment and technological sovereignty. Meanwhile, the AI industry is shaping new economic alliances. The EU is promoting what it calls AI sovereignty, aiming to reduce reliance on US and Chinese tech giants. While the US has restricted AI chip exports, limiting access to cutting-edge technology for competitors. Countries that invest heavily in AI today will likely dominate the digital economy of tomorrow, while others risk falling behind in an AI-driven global order. Matthias Kettermann is a professor of innovation theory and philosophy of law at the University of Innsbruck. Now, Professor, how do you see AI shaping global economic power over the next decade?
So clearly, AI is going to be a major force, a driver of change, a driver of innovation, a driver of investment. We're seeing, you've mentioned that, substantial investment in the millions and billions of dollars in all regions of the world. We're seeing major advances in large language models, and with those advances come exactly those ecological costs that you have talked about. We're at a cusp of a major technological revolution in that regard, and we are seeing the geopolitical problems that come with such a powerful technology. Countries are now seeing that they can leverage their own geostrategic visions through that technology, and that's what we're seeing. That's why there's so much disagreement at the moment.
Right, and what are the biggest risks of AI regulation stifling innovation?
Well, that's exactly the thing. Regulating innovative technology always comes with risks. If you do too much, if you set too strict rules, you will stifle innovation. If you don't set enough rules, you have the risk that technology runs away with you, that companies monopolize advantages, that you cannot, they just destroy the market and thereby also hamper innovation. Let's look at platforms. We haven't done a good job with regulating them, and now very few players dominate the market. With AI, I have the feeling that the European approach is much less bad than that the US makes it out to be. So the basic approach to have sort of more transparency and more accountability for how AI is used and implemented is something that is shared by basically all major rational policymakers across the world, from the ASEAN countries that have published a declaration to that end to the European Union, of course. The US is now kind of stepping back a little bit based on their new political priorities. But basically, there is nobody who doesn't think that a bit of more transparency, a bit more accountability wouldn't be a good idea for AI.
And one of the biggest concerns is energy consumption. How do you think governments should balance their AI expansion goals with energy consumption concerns?
Definitely. We want digitalization to be sustainable, and we want sustainability to be increasingly digitalized. So we want to leverage the tools of our digital transformation to become better in terms of our ecological goals. Currently, we're not doing a good job. We're just focusing on making the models bigger and making the data centers faster with substantial costs for groundwater or for energy consumption. Right now, there are a couple of technological fixes to that. A number of companies have proposed ideas how to make data centers more efficient, how to use less fresh water. But right now, we still have that big problem that the AI revolution is much more data, it's data hungry anyway, but also very energy hungry, and doesn't seem to be very good for the environment. That's something that also the whole crypto market is grappling with. Right, and we know that the UK and US decided not to sign the AI action statement. What do you make of this? Well, that's just posing, right? The US currently has the approach that we're not going to sign anything. We'll do our way, and if anybody comes and stops US companies from doing business, we're going to bring the full force and might of the US government, and we're going to annex Greenland or whatever Trump comes up with next. I wouldn't make too much of it. So it wasn't a good idea that Trump withdrew, killed Biden's last executive order on AI. Biden had a rather neat executive order on AI that basically mirrored the obligations of the AI Act in Europe. Now, US consumers, US citizens have much less recourse against companies that misuse AI models, that misuse biomedical data for training AI tools. I don't think that that's the innovation we want, but also on the global level, I wouldn't make too much of it. In the past, the vast majority of countries have engaged meaningfully in processes of finding rules together in formats ranging from the Council of Europe to the UNESCO to other UN settings. There's a global process of talking about the future of AI as well on the UN level. Okay, Professor Matthias Kettermann, thank you very much for joining us. I'm very welcome. You're welcome. Thank you very much. Well, that's all your business news for now. Thanks for watching.